You've tuned in to the unavailing frequency. But don't touch that dial. We've got you right where we want you.
This is the Dead Reckoning Part 2, the language of incident scenes. There is a specific kind of decision that doesn't feel like a decision when you're making it. It feels like inevitability dressed in the clothes of choice. You tell yourself you're choosing, you go through the motions of weighing and considering, but the truth is that somewhere below the level of deliberate thought, the conclusion has already been reached, the path already selected, and what you're doing in the moment of apparent decision is just catching up to yourself. I decided to follow the GPS the way I decided to buy the car, the way you decide on a Tuesday in October that something will do. It took me until mid-December to do it consciously, by which point I had, without fully acknowledging it, been preparing. I'd been paying attention to the pattern. I'd been keeping a document on my phone, a plain notes app, nothing dramatic, just dates and observations that I now opened and read back to myself in the order I'd written them. November 12th. GPS told me to turn onto Laurel Street. No destination entered. Didn't go. No camera. November 22nd. GPS tried to reroute me to Flatbush Avenue on way to D's. Turn volume off. No camera. November 28th. Route 44 nighttime. GPS tried to send me to Route 10 South. Refused. Camera appeared. Lasted approximately 3 minutes until I was on 84. December 3rd. Sunday morning grocery store. GPS said Laurel Street again. Went. Fire on Laurel Street already in progress. December 7th. Route 10 South. Accident confirmed. 8:52 p.m. same night. My Route 44 drive was 8:45. December 9th. Nothing. GPS. Normal. December 11th. Nothing. December 14th. GPS tried to send me to Albany Avenue instead of my office. Didn't go. Camera for 90 seconds. Checked Albany Avenue on news. Nothing. That last entry was interesting. The Albany Avenue one. I checked the news and didn't find anything, but I hadn't gone there. Maybe the thing, the anomaly, the incident, whatever word I was using in the private vocabulary I developed for this, hadn't yet happened. Maybe it had happened and hadn't been newsworthy enough for coverage, or maybe the pattern wasn't as clean as I was trying to make it, and some of the GPS's misdirections were noise rather than signal, and I was a person sitting alone in the kitchen trying to find the signal. The camera, though. The camera was not noise. The camera was a message, and the message was consistent. I see you. When you don't follow, I show you that I see you. The camera had appeared twice on Route 44 when I definitively refused to turn, and on Albany Avenue when I passed the suggested turn and kept going. It had not appeared on the occasions when I'd simply turned the volume off, or when the initial direction had been casual and I'd ignored it without fully processing the refusal. The camera appeared when I was deliberate about not going, as though whatever was in the GPS could tell the difference between oblivious non-compliance and willful refusal. This thought lived in my head for a week before I was ready to say it plainly, even to myself. This GPS was not malfunctioning. The GPS was trying to communicate with me in the only language it had, direction. And when I didn't respond, it resorted to the only other thing it could do, which was demonstrate that the relationship between us was not one of my choosing, that I was in it whether I'd agreed to be or not. I'd bought the car. I'd taken the car with the GPS. These were my choices. Everything after was apparently non-negotiable. The Saturday I decided to follow the GPS deliberately. I woke up at 7:15 and lay in bed for a while listening to the sounds of the building, the pipes, the upstairs neighbor's TV, the specific creak of the third step on the main staircase that I'd come to use as an alarm clock. And I thought about what I was planning to do, whether or not it was a good idea. It was not a good idea. I knew this the way you know things that you've turned over enough times to see all the angles. Following an anomalous GPS to unknown locations. Locations where, by my own documentation, accidents and fires were occurring. This was not a reasonable response to the situation. The reasonable response was sell the car, buy a different car, use the phone GPS like a normal person, and get on with my life. But I kept coming back to the deleted account. The one that had asked if it was looking back at you. Someone else had experienced this. Someone had been where I was, sitting in front of a screen, looking at a GPS that was doing something that I couldn't do, and asked the right question, and then they disappeared. I didn't know what disappeared meant in this context. The account was deleted. That's all I knew. People deleted accounts all the time, but the question had been asked, which meant someone had known to ask it, which meant someone had been in the car when the screen looked back at them. And I wanted more than I wanted comfort, more than I wanted something reasonable. I wanted to know what they'd found out. I got up, I fed Ptolemy, I made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the parking lot where the Civic sat in the early gray December light. Patient, silver, saying nothing. I got dressed, I put on layers. It's going to be cold. I put in my phone in my coat pocket in my wallet. I took out a water bottle, granola bar, because I didn't know how long I was going to be driving. And I had enough of my mother's practicality in me to know that things go badly faster when you're also hungry. I went down to the car. I sat in the driver's seat and started the engine and waited for the GPS to boot. The globe, the chimes, the map. I sat there with the engine running, the heater starting to push warm air. I said, okay, I'm going to follow you wherever you want me to go. I felt stupid saying it out loud. I also felt that it was necessary. If whatever was in the GPS could tell the difference between oblivious and deliberate, it can also tell the difference between following directions and agreeing to follow directions. I wanted to signal clearly I was choosing this. I was a participant and not just a vehicle. The GPS did nothing for a moment. The blue arrow sat in the parking lot. Then the voice said, in 300 feet, turn right on Asylum Avenue. So I turned right on Asylum Avenue. It took me to the river. Not the Connecticut River, the Park River, which runs underground through most of Hartford but services in Colt Park, a stretch of green on the city's south side that in summer has baseball diamonds and picnic areas and families. And in December, it has dead grass and bare trees and a quality of abandonment that isn't quite desolate, but it's in that neighborhood. The GPS brought me along New Park Avenue and then south on Brookfield. And when it said to turn left on Westerfield Avenue and then turn right on Colt Street and a park appeared on my left, I slowed down. I followed the access road that ran along the western edge. It directed me to a parking lot near the river. There was another car in the lot, a white Subaru Forester with a cracked taillight, running. I pulled in 2 spaces away and turned off my engine and sat down. The river was visible through the trees, dark and low, moving with that particular winter quietness of water that had slowed down. The park was empty. The sky was white, the uniform textureless white of a day when snow is possible but hasn't committed. The GPS chimed, "You have arrived at your destination." I looked around at the park, at the river, at the Subaru. There was a person in the Subaru. I could see the shape of a head above the driver's seat headrest. I sat for a minute, running through the reasons not to approach a stranger in a car in an empty park in the winter. These were good reasons, numerous, and I acknowledged them. But then I got out of the Civic. The cold hit me immediately. The specific cold of being near water, which is a few degrees worse than the same temperature away from the water. Something about moisture and wind chill that physics can explain and that the body registers as cold being personal, as though the cold has identified you specifically. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the Subaru. As I got close, the driver's window came down about 4 inches. It's a reasonable precaution, and I respected it. The person in the Subaru was a man, maybe 40, maybe 45. He had a beard growing more gray than brown and dark circles under his eyes, the kind that speak to a duration rather than a single bad night. He was wearing a heavy canvas work jacket, holding a paper coffee cup with both hands, and he was looking at me with an expression that I would describe as exhausted recognition, the look of someone who'd been expecting something and was not surprised when it arrived, but was not happy about that either. "Navigon?" he said. The word hit me like a physical object. "What?" "Your GPS, is it a Navigon?" I stared at him for a moment. 7100, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. He took a sip of his coffee and opened his eyes. "What year's your car?" "It's a 2009 Civic. Why, what's yours?" "It's 2008 Accord. I've had mine for about 3 years." He said this the way someone says something that they've said many times in their head but never out loud. "Name's Ray Gutierrez. I'm a plumber from Meridian. I don't have an explanation for any of this. I've tried to get rid of this car twice." "You've tried to get rid of it?" "First time I listed it for sale, the GPS turned on by itself in the middle of the night. I live in an apartment complex and my car was in the lot. I was asleep. My neighbor knocked on my door at 2 in the morning to tell my car's screen was lit up and it looked weird. He thought maybe my battery was dying. I went down. The screen was showing." He stopped and he took another sip of coffee. "I know what the camera looks like," I said. The cold was very specific now, very close. "So your camera, it was on?" "Well, from a different angle than usual. From outside the car looking through the windshield." He paused. "I took the listing down." "What was the second time?" "I sold it. Found the buyer, did the paperwork. He drove it off the lot." Ray looked out the windshield at the river. "He called me 2 days later and he said the GPS won't stop trying to take him back to my address. He thought it was a defect. I refunded him and he gave me the car back." Another pause. "I didn't argue about it." I leaned against the side of the Subaru, which was something I would not normally do, leaning on a stranger's car. But my legs made a small independent decision and I was honoring it. "So the GPS sent you here?" "Yeah, the GPS sent me here. Why?" He looked at me. "I don't know why it does this thing. It just does it sometimes. It sends me to a location. There's another car with a Navigon, I think." He stopped again. I could see him weighing something, deciding how much of a true answer to give, and I recognized this. It was the same calculation I'd watched Phil Kolowski make in the car 2 months ago. "You know, I think it's trying to get us to talk to each other, like it has information to distribute. And this is how it distributes it. In person, one-on-one." "Why in person?" "Because it can't transmit. It can't send us messages. It can't email us. It's got no cellular connection, no Wi-Fi. It receives GPS signals and that's it. So it routes us. It uses directions to get us where it wants us." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been in this lot twice before. Once I found a woman from New Haven who had her Navigon for 6 months. She was completely spooked. I gave her everything I knew and I drove away. I haven't heard from her since." He said it without inflection, and I couldn't tell whether or not hearing from her again was a relief or a worry. I made a note to ask about it later. "The other time I was here alone. Sat for about an hour, then I drove home. Either the other person didn't come, or they came and saw me and decided not to get out of their car." "How many of us are there?" He shook his head, a small motion. "I don't know. I've met 4 maybe in 3 years, including you." I thought about that. 4 people with old Navigon units. 4 people whose cars had been doing what mine are doing. "Do we all live here in Connecticut?" while everyone I met's within about 2 hours of Hartford. I don't know if that's because of the Navigon covering this area. It's limited to this region, or because I'm the only one who the GPS it brings me to others who have it. I pulled my coat tighter. The cold was relentless. Will you get out of the car? He looked at me for a moment, then something shifted in his expression. A small, surprised movement. Like a person who's been holding themselves very still for a long time, who's just been given permission to stop. He got out of the car. He was taller than I expected. The dark circles were even more pronounced without the window between us. He extended a hand and I shook it. Ainsley Carter, I said. So tell me, how long have you had it? I told him about Laurel Street, told him about the fire and Route 10 South and the accident, the Albany Avenue directions. They'd left had nothing that I could find, and I told him about the camera, what it felt like to see my own face on the screen, the angle that shouldn't have been possible. He listened to me without interrupting, which was a quality I noticed and appreciated, quality of someone who'd done this before and understood that you needed to get the whole thing out before any of it made sense. When I finished, he said, the Albany Avenue one might have been a near miss. Something that was about to happen, but then it didn't. What do you mean? Well, the GPS only routes us to things that are already happening. Sometimes it routes us to things that are going to happen, maybe in the next hour or two. The timing is... He paused, searching for precision. Approximate. Imprecise, even. Like it's picking up a signal, and the signal has some static in it. Picking up a signal from where? He shook his head again. Same small motion. This is where I stopped being able to have all the answers. It's where I've been stuck for about 2.5 years now. We stood in the cold by the river, and I let this settle. A bird crossed the white sky above us, some dark shape moving south, gone before I could identify it. The river made no sound. The camera, I said. Do you know what it is? Ray Gutierrez looked at me with those exhausted eyes, and for a moment I thought he was going to tell me something that would rearrange everything, some technical explanation, some piece of knowledge he uncovered in 3 years of living with this. Then he said, I think the camera is the only other thing it can do. It routes us when it wants to direct us, and it shows us footage when it wants to remind us we don't have a choice. He was quiet for a moment. I think there's a difference in having no choice in the sense of being compelled, and having no choice in the sense of not wanting to choose otherwise. What do you mean? I mean, I've been to a lot of places it sends me, and some of them, He stopped again. This time the stopping was different, heavier, like he'd run up against something he was still deciding to describe. Some of them, if I'd had been there, if I'd stayed in my original route and not followed the GPS, I think the outcome would have been different. Different how? He looked at the river. I was in Bristol about 8 months ago, back in October. It sent me to a residential street, a cul-de-sac. Nothing happening when I got there. I sat in my car for maybe 10 minutes, and then this kid, maybe 8-9-year-old kid, he came out his front porch, running into the street without looking. There was this delivery truck coming around the corner. It was absolutely not going to stop in time. He paused. I leaned on my horn. Truck driver, he heard it. He hit his brakes. The kid stopped at the edge of his driveway, only about 4 feet. He said this without drama, without the kind of emphasis you'd expect from someone describing a moment they'd prevented a child's death. He said it in a way you say things you've turned over so many times, the original event has gone smooth like sea glass. That's what happens sometimes. The GPS puts you in position, and whatever happens next, that's up to you to decide. We talked for about an hour and 20 minutes in the cold by Park River. Ray Gutierrez had bought his Accord from a private seller in Wallingford. The seller, a man named Dennis, who Ray described as unremarkable in every dimension, he'd priced the car below market value and been strangely curious about who was buying it. The Navigon had been factory installed, same as mine. The car had been otherwise normal. Ray had not experienced anything unusual for the first 2 months of ownership. His first anomaly had been a gas leak, a house in Meridian, on his way to a job. The GPS had rerouted him past a house where a family was in the front yard, mother, 2 kids, a dog. The smell of gas was strong enough that his car windows, with even rolled up, he could notice them as he slowly drove past, obeying the speed limit out of some instinct he couldn't explain. He'd stopped, he'd gotten out. He'd asked the family if they smelled it, and they hadn't. They'd been outside, the wind was away from them. He called the fire department. The gas main in the basement of the house had been leaking for what the firefighter estimated was approximately 4 hours. "Nobody would have been home for another 6 hours, Ray said. "The father worked evenings, the mother was just going to go back inside and start dinner." He'd driven away before anyone could thank him, ask him any questions, establish any kind of record of his presence. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Because I didn't know what to say. My GPS made me drive past your house?" He shook his head. "Also because the GPS was already recalculating when the fire truck was still pulling up. It wanted me to be moving again." "And where did it want you to go next?" "Nowhere. It just routed me back to my job. I was a plumber, had a toilet to replace in Southington. The GPS took me there normally. Nothing strange happened for another 3 weeks." This matched my experience, the intervals. The GPS didn't route to anomalies every day. It was quiet most of the time. The incidents were punctuated by long stretches of normalcy, which Ray said he'd initially used to convince himself that everything was fine, that he'd imagined the patterns until the patterns reasserted themselves with enough force that the self-deception couldn't hold. "Have you told anyone about this?" I asked. "My sister. She thought I was just burned out. I was going through something rough personally at the time, my divorce finalizing. She said gently that stress does things to your perception, and I was probably overtired, finding patterns in these coincidences." He said this without bitterness. She might have been right for the first few incidents, but then she wasn't. "What changed her mind?" He was quiet for a moment. The river moved. The car passed on Colt Street, its headlights briefly combing through the bare trees. "I took her with me once. Drove her to a location the GPS had picked. There was a minor flooding situation in the basement. Neighbor had a pipe that burst and the water was moving toward the house next door. An elderly man lived there alone. We helped get the water under control until a plumber arrived. My sister didn't say anything for the rest of the drive home." He looked at me. "She doesn't talk about it, but she doesn't think I'm overtired anymore." "What do you think the Navigon is?" I asked. "In your 3 years with it, you've got to have a theory." He leaned against his car, this tall, tired man with his coffee gone cold in his hand. He thought for a moment in the way of someone who had formed a theory and tested it many times, was not fully satisfied with it, but has nothing better. "I think someone built it," he said finally, "or at least they adapted it. I don't think the standard Navigon 7100 does this. I've looked, and whatever we have, it's not standard. I think someone took the hardware and did something to it, upgraded the receiver maybe, or added something to the receiver that isn't just about satellite signals." He paused. "I think whatever it's picking up, it's doing it locally, within a certain radius. It's routing us back to the source." "What's the source?" "I don't know. Something that produces a signal the receiver can detect. Something that happens at a location before the incidents occur." He frowned. "I mean, think about it. A gas leak doesn't announce itself to a GPS satellite. A fire doesn't register with navigation software. Whatever this GPS is detecting, it's not detecting the incident itself. It's detecting some precursor, some condition that correlates with the incident. Like what? Well, that's what I don't know. I'm just a plumber. I'm not. He gestured a small self-deprecating wave. I understand systems I can see and touch. This is something I can't see and touch. My understanding of it is very limited. I thought about this. Some precursor condition, something the GPS, the modified GPS at least, could receive and locate and route us toward. Is there anyone who could look at the hardware, maybe take the unit apart? Oh, I've thought about that. For about a year, I've thought about it. He looked at his coffee cup, then down at the ground. That woman I mentioned, the one up in New Haven, she was an electrical engineer. She wanted to disassemble hers and look at the components. She's going to let me know what she found out. And? Well, she called me once to say she'd started the disassembly process and found something unexpected. She was going to keep going and call me back with more details. But, that was like 14 months ago. I haven't heard from her since. The cold had settled into my hands and I pushed them into my coat pockets. You think something happened to her? It wasn't a question. Oh, I think she's fine. And she stopped wanting to be in contact, which is a reasonable response to a situation like this. I respect that. He said this with a particular conviction of a man who's told himself something so many times he almost believes it. Or the GPS didn't route her to minor incidents forever. You said it's taking you to things where your presence mattered. What happens if it takes you somewhere and it's not a stuck delivery truck? Ray Gutierrez looked at me for a moment. In that moment in the flat river light by the winter, I could see all 3 years of it in his face. The accumulation, the weight of it, the thing you carry when you're a person who knows something you cannot fully explain and cannot stop knowing. I've thought about it a lot. He didn't answer the question directly, but he didn't need to. Before we left the park, he gave me his phone number and I gave him mine. He told me 3 things that he'd learned that he considered non-negotiable truths. 1. The GPS routes us to incident sites before the incidents occur. Always. The window is anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours in advance. He'd never arrive after something was already over, though he'd arrive during events in progress like the Laurel Street fire. 2. The camera appears specifically when you refuse a route that you've been given twice or more. 1 refusal is ignored. 2 refusals trigger the camera. He tested it and confirmed it. Well, how do you make it stop? I asked. You proceed to the destination, or you reach a point where the GPS determines you're too far away to be useful and just gives up. The camera runs until one of those 2 conditions is met. 3. He had no idea what happened when you arrive at the destination because he always arrived before the event. Sometimes nothing was happening when he got there and the GPS went quiet and he sat and waited for something to occur. Sometimes he could act. The boy, the gas leak. Sometimes he arrived and nothing happened at all and he drove home wondering if the GPS had been wrong or if his presence had somehow prevented whatever was going to happen, or if he was just sitting in a car on a random street accomplishing nothing. 3 years, I said, and you still don't know what it wants from you. I know what it does. Whether that's the same as what it wants, I don't know if that's the right word, though, if that's the right word. What word would you use? He thought for a moment. Function, maybe? I think the GPS has a function, and I think we're part of how that function performs. Whether anyone intended that, whether there's purpose behind the function, whether the function is... He stopped. I don't know how these things work. I've stopped trying to know, mostly. He said mostly in a way that told me he hadn't stopped at all. I drove home from the park and sat in my apartment and thought for most of the afternoon. I thought about Ray and his 3 years, his divorce, his sister who wouldn't talk about it. I thought about the electrical engineer from New Haven whose name Ray either didn't know or hadn't given me. I thought about 4 people with Navigon 7100 units in Connecticut and how many more there might be outside Ray's geographic range, outside the incidents he'd been routed to. I thought about the camera and the angle it shot from, and Ray saying from the outside of the car, looking in through the windshield, his camera had been outside, mine had been inside, 2 different angles, the same impossible absence of a camera to produce them. I opened my notes app and added, December 15th, Colt Park, met Ray Gutierrez from Meridian, Navigon, Accord, 2008, 3 years. 4 others known to him, engineer from New Haven, no contact for 14 months. Key points, precursor signal, not the incident itself. Camera triggers on second refusal. Window is 15 minutes to 2 hours before the event. I stared at the note. Engineer from New Haven, no contact for 14 months. I thought about someone who was an electrical engineer who had a Navigon, who had disassembled hers and found something unexpected, and who had then stopped returning calls. I thought about how I would find this person. I thought about whether I wanted to find her. Both of these thoughts ran alongside each other for a while without resolving, and I was still sitting with them when the GPS on the dashboard of the Civic powered on. I could see it from my kitchen window if I pressed close to the glass. The faint yellowish glow of the screen barely visible at this distance, the blue light of the map. The car was off, its engine was off. The GPS had no power source that I knew of when the car was off. I pressed my face closer to the glass. The screen was definitely on. I could see the blue glow of the map, the gray lines of the street. And I could see, or I thought I could see at this distance, through the 2 panes of glass across the parking lot, that the blue arrow that represented my car's positioning was moving, slowly, deliberately, in a direction that was not my parking lot, like someone tracing a route. I pulled back from the window and I sat down at the kitchen table. I looked at my hands for a moment and then I looked at Ptolemy, who was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, which was unusual. He preferred elevated surfaces, and he was looking toward the window with an alertness he did not ordinarily apply to anything that wasn't food. Don't, I said. To the cat? To the car? I don't know. I didn't go back to the window. 3 nights later on a Wednesday, the GPS woke me up. Now let me explain what I mean by this, because it sounds like something that should be impossible. The GPS is just a screen. You can't reach across a parking lot in a building, a closed apartment door, 15 foot of kitchen, and a Murphy bed, and shake a sleeping person awake, and yet I woke up at 2:17 a.m., which I know because I looked at my phone immediately upon waking the way I always do. The quick orientation check. Time, any messages, okay, back to sleep. I was not anxious. I'd not been dreaming anything I could remember. I was simply asleep and then I was awake, with a particular clarity of someone woken by something external rather than their own internal clock, that specific quality of what was that even when you haven't heard a what or a that. I lay still for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Ptolemy was not on the bed, which was unusual. I got up and went to the kitchen window. The GPS was on and the screen was bright in the dark parking lot, brighter than it should have been. The Navigon screen is not especially luminous, but at 2 in the morning in a dark lot was the only light. It drew the eye like a beacon. The map was displayed. My building was labeled. I could see this from the window at this hour, with no ambient light competing. And on the screen in the center where the blue arrow represented my car, where it should have been, there was instead a small red marker, the kind of marker GPS units use for safe destinations. The red marker was not placed on my car. It was approximately 2 blocks north on Laurel Street. I was looking at this and understanding that the GPS with the engine off in the middle of the night was showing me a marked destination when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a push notification from a local news app I downloaded and mostly forgotten about. Breaking news. Structure fire on Laurel Street, Hartford. Fire crews responding. Story developing. I looked at my phone. I looked at the parking lot. I looked back. I said out loud in the cold, dark kitchen, "I heard you." Ptolemy appeared from somewhere and sat beside me on the kitchen floor, and we both looked at the window at the light. The light pulsed once, a brief brightening surge, like a screen waking from sleep, and then returned to its normal brightness. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep long. In the morning, I searched the fire. A 3-story multifamily home, kitchen fire, started around 2 a.m. and spread on the second floor before it was contained. 2 families displaced, but no deaths. 3 people were treated for smoke inhalation and all released. The address was a block and a half from where the GPS had placed the marker. I could have been there in 3 minutes. At 2:17 a.m., the fire was just starting, just beginning to move. I could have been there in 3 minutes and done what? I was not a firefighter. I had no equipment, no training. I had no capacity to fight a fire. What could I have done at a house fire at 2 in the morning that the fire department couldn't? I sat with this for a long time and I couldn't find the answer, but I also couldn't stop feeling that there was something. The GPS knew something I didn't. It had a reason for waking me specifically, for showing me the marker, for putting me in motion towards that house at that hour. There was something I'd been supposed to do, and I'd failed to do it. I called Ray the next morning. "Does it ever wake you up?" I asked. "Yeah." "Should I have gone?" "I don't always goes when it wakes me. I mean, I can't be available 24 hours a day. I've got a job. He stopped. "The first time it woke me and I didn't go, there was a car accident on my street in the morning. It was just minor, nobody was hurt. I don't know if my presence would have changed anything." "And the times you do go?" He was quiet for a moment. "There was a night back in August up in Waterbury. A man was having a cardiac event in his driveway at 2 in the morning. He'd come out to get something from his car and just collapsed. His wife was asleep, no one knew. I called 911 from my car, flagged down a passing vehicle to stay with him until the ambulance arrived." "Is he alive?" "The paramedics said the response time window was critical. If it had only been like 20 minutes later. Yes, he's alive." We sat on the phone, both of us, with this. "I didn't go last night," I said. "I know. My device told me you didn't." I absorbed this slowly. "Wait, your GPS told you I didn't go? How?" "It showed me a location and a route, and then it showed me that the route was canceled, like the destination had been removed. It does this when one of us is supposed to go and doesn't. I don't know how it knows. I don't know how it communicates between units." "You said it doesn't have connectivity." "Well, I said it receives GPS signal. I said I thought it had no connectivity, but I'm less certain of that now than I was a year ago." I thought about this. A modified receiver. A signal it could pick up that wasn't satellite based. If it could receive, could it transmit? Not data, not video, but some narrow thing, some pulse, a confirmation that the destination had been reached or abandoned? "Ray," I said, "do you know how to find that electrical engineer from New Haven?" "I've got her first name, Claire. I've got the intersection where I met her, which was the same spot that we met at in Colt Park. I've got the make and model of her car. It was a 2007 Toyota Camry." "That's enough," I said. "Ainsley, I haven't looked for her on purpose." "I know." "Because if she's found and she's fine, maybe she doesn't want to be found. Maybe looking her is a violation of sorts. If she's not fine," he stopped. "Then we should know that." He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I'll send you everything I've got." The text came through while I was at work the next day, the Hartford office, surrounded by the ordinary hum of an ordinary Thursday, keyboards, phone conversation across the room, someone's microwave lunch making the kitchen smell of something with too much sodium. I read it under my desk with the phone in my lap like a student hiding something from a teacher. Claire Ashworth, 2007 Toyota Camry, silver, Connecticut plates. Last met November 3rd, 2023, Colt Park. She said she had found secondary component in the Navigon housing, a separate piece of hardware, not factory, not standard. Said it looked like it had been added after manufacture. She said she'd never seen anything like it. That was the last contact. I checked the obituaries, nothing. I checked LinkedIn, her profile's still active, last updated 18 months ago. I don't know what that means. I read it twice. A separate piece of hardware, not factory, not standard. Someone had modified the units, not the manufacturer. Someone had taken standard Navigon 7100 devices and they had added something to them. And then those units had ended up in specific cars, and those cars had found their way to specific buyers, and those buyers were now being routed to incident sites in the middle of Connecticut. I sat very still in my ergonomic desk chair in the West Hartford office, thought about Phil Kalowski, who had sold me this car, who had described the GPS voice as something in a way that suggested he'd spent time with it, and had said the previous owner was a retired school teacher from Simsbury without producing her name or any documentation connecting her to the car. I thought about the Carfax report being clean and how a Carfax is only as complete as once reported. I thought about Phil saying, "Yep," in the specific way of someone whose brain was doing something else. After work, I drove out to Route 9 and pulled into the gravel lot of Kalowski's pre-owned auto. The lot was open. There were 12 cars and 2 trucks arranged in their rows, small pennant flags between the light poles stirring in the December wind. The office was a small building with plate glass windows and yellow interior light. Phil's truck was parked out beside it. I went in. Phil was behind his desk reading something on a computer screen, still in the down vest. He looked up, and the warmth that spread across his face was the warmth of a man who's very good at warmth. It was real enough that I found myself wondering as I crossed the floor towards him whether I'd constructed something around an innocent person. "Miss Carter," he said. "Something wrong with that Civic?" "Well, I have a question about the GPS," I said. His face did the complicated thing again. The same thing it had done in October when I'd asked about the GPS in the first place. Not bad, not guilty, but complicated. The look of a man with more information than he's allocated to share. "Sit down," he said. His voice was different, quieter. The salesman warmth was dialed back. He pushed back his desk and looked at me with something that was not quite seriousness and not quite apology, and yet was both. "I was wondering when you'd come back," he said. The wind pushed at the plate glass window. The pennant flag tapped under their poles. "Tell me," I said.